Hello, everybody. Welcome back to episode 127 of the Podcana podcast. This week, we are taking a look at some of the best decks to be playing within set 10. Whispers in the Well is nearly here. It releases on Friday. I'm super excited to dive into it. And joining me, as usual, I have Sky and Thiago. These two guys have been doing crazy amounts of testing over the past few days, so I don't think there's anybody better to talk to you about some of the best decks within the early set 10 meta at the moment. Starting off with you, Thiago, has been going. Have you been enjoying this early testing so far?
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing well. I've been grinding. So, yeah, definitely been having fun. I've kind of just been playing a little bit of everything. So, I feel like I have a pretty good sense of what's going on. But yeah, I mean, it's just always fun to explore the new stuff.
Awesome. And Sky?
Yeah, I don't know if I've had a crazy amount of testing, but probably to the normal person, yes. But it's been fun. I haven't tested quite as many archetypes. I'm kind of the person that really likes to lock in on like one or two decks and like kind of gauge the other decks by just playing them at first and seeing what I kind of want to explore next. But um, I've been playing a lot of blue steel, a lot of amber steel, and it's been fun. I think both decks are pretty solid in this meta. So I don't necessarily like the meta that I think will actually shape up and form, but it's always fun to explore and at the start of a set see what's strong. So
For sure, yeah. Before we jump into it, I was recently on somebody else invited me onto their podcast and they were just talking through like Milwaukee and stuff about the end of the kind of fabled meta. And I do want to get your guys' take on this because I honestly can't remember if we spoke about it on the podcast already, but it's just the idea of what a balanced meta in a TCG looks like. And I think I spoke to you about this a lot, Tiago, specifically in Milwaukee, where it's like a lot of the decks, especially when we looked at the data, right? A lot of the decks don't have like very spiky win rates against each other, right? It's very flat. It's very close to 50% for most of the decks. And I think ultimately that's why, for the most part, there was a lot of people that could bring a deck that they feel very confident playing. They feel like they know how to play the deck well and they can ultimately perform very well. And of course, there were still some decks like Blurple was still like the most played deck, a very dominant deck. Purple Steel we knew was going to be more popular. But I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on like the general opinion of a balanced meta when it comes to very flat win rates versus a very triangle like rock paper scissors meta where this deck is really good into this deck but this deck beats this deck, if that makes sense, from I guess like general player perception, because from what I've heard it may not be the majority. I know a lot of people maybe haven't enjoyed the fabled meta so much. I know, Sky, you're kind of an exception maybe where you've like you have, but again it's like I can see it from both sides because ultimately I think a flat meta is a balanced meta, and I also think a rock paper scissors meta is also technically a balanced meta. So I'll start off with you, Sky. Like, what's your general opinion on those differences, right?
yeah, so I think Lorcana is a little bit different than most card games when you take a look at a conversation like this. I think a lot of it's the mulligan. So like post rotation format, there's like more less and less like really powerful cards. So the ones that are remaining that are powerful are more potent.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at like what the mulligan does with this game, like you can have a four of and like you're gonna see it, 65-75% of the time on curve. Um, that's very strong. It just makes the games where you don't have that feel really bad. So like cards like Cinderella with the new set that are really strong, and like you can kind of almost build, you want to build the deck around it because it's so powerful and it's going to reward you for doing that. I just don't like the games where you then miss it and like your game plan kind of folds, because then you want to like hedge your bets by playing like thinking of a secondary thing to do if you don't hit Cinderella, but it's so much worse that like devoting deck slots to it just makes your deck worse. So that I think is my only gripe with like formats like this, is where there's cards like that. I mean, even stuff like Elsa 5 cost is something that's kind of in that same vein where it's like, well, if they have this every time versus certain matchups, it's going to be much better for them. And that can feel bad, but I think overall the meta was pretty healthy with Fabled. Like we saw so many decks do so well. Like that's just kind of the nature of TCGs at the end of the day, is that you have to go for your strongest lines, and like sometimes no, you're not going to hit them, but it's still like most games are going to be playable. Most games are going to will have those, so like you still want to build around it. But yeah, I think going forward it seems like we're going to still be in a similar spot, maybe even worse with cards like Cinderella. I just think Cinderella is crazy, so like I'm sure I'll keep mentioning that, but the card is nuts, and I think we'll still have this meta be like, well, it's really warped by these few cards. and it's not going to feel the greatest, but I think it's still very open. Like I played quite a few different decks, and they've seemed pretty open
Would
and free.
would you prefer, like I said, a meta like this where maybe there are so many different types of decks that you can play, and granted some cards might be a little bit warping, over a meta where, let's say back in the day where like red blue was really dominant into like Amber Steel, but then Amber Steel had a really good matchup. Like I know if we look back at the Fabled meta, like you could say, yeah, Amber Steel can kind of high roll against Blurple a little bit. Like that's kind of the one direction where if you're like, especially if you're on the play, you'll feel pretty
Yeah,
confident.
for
But
sure.
what about like those metas where something is so heavily favored? Like it's like, you sit down, it's like you feel super favored. You feel like there's, from what I'm playing against, I have a really high chance I should win this game. Like, do you prefer metas like that, or are you more happier to play
I
in like
like
what?
them both. I think
Yeah,
there's I like it when it goes back and forth because there's advantages and disadvantages to both. From like a player, you can take a look at the meta game and like a very rock paper scissors meta and really analyze and see if there's anything that anybody's missing. And that's like kind of my favorite of TCGs. Like if you can find a couple of cards that like pull a matchup a little bit because the meta is so defined and like people think they win that matchup, and if it turns it a little bit, then you can really like benefit from that. But then it also just feels bad. Like sometimes there isn't answers like that. A lot of times, I'd say like every other meta where it is rock paper scissors, there will be an answer, and some there just isn't. So then that of course can feel bad. But yeah, I think it's good to go back and forth. Having a meta that's very open and feeling like in every game, if they maybe don't hit the optimal curve, feels good as well. But then yeah, sometimes it's nice to find that dark horse when the meta is like super defined, rock paper scissors.
sure. Tiago?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way that I see it is that every single meta, like the same thing happens where we play the meta, people say it's the worst meta of all time, and they're like, I can't wait till next set, it's all going to be fixed. Like in set 8, people are like, we've been playing the same meta for 6 months, nothing's changed. When rotation comes, things are going to get so much better. I'm not going to get Diablo shifted. People aren't going to have these Prince John and Muses just sitting there with Ward that I can't deal with. Like when Fabled comes, everything is going to be so much better, and then Fabled's here, and people are like, this is the worst meta ever. Things used to be so good, and now they're so bad. And it's going to be the same thing this set. People are really looking forward to it, and then when it comes, people are going to get really frustrated and be like, last set there's 5 playable decks, and all of them were like so close into each other. And so like I, this always happens, and ultimately I think that we want a meta where a lot of decks are 50% into each other, but that 50 like a deck being 50% into something else isn't always the same, right? So a deck could be 50% into something else because it's extremely skill intensive, and then both players are like fighting, and then whoever like um plays better will like get the edge, and they'll get over 50% and the other person will get under, right? Because they didn't play as well. But there's also like 50% like if you have a I win the game card and you draw it exactly 50% of the time, it's not a skill intensive game or a fun game to wait for you to draw the I win the game card or not draw the I win the game card. So I think that that's a lot of people's frustrations with a deck like Green Blue is that it's a deck that has a lot of even matchups, but its matchups are more so dependent on what the blue green player draws rather than like it's an even matchup because both players are like battling for like small incremental advantages. So I think people want a meta where there's a lot of decks that are 50% into each other, but in a way that you feel like you have a lot of agency in the outcome rather than it being like a coin flip for the 50%, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think that makes perfect sense for sure. Awesome. All right, let's jump straight into looking at these deck lists. Before we jump into it, again, I want to give a huge shout out to PPG for partnering with the podcast. They have their Pro Play Summit coming up in Orlando on December 12th to 14th, featuring Lorcana as well as all of these other awesome TCGs. Just to remind everybody, on Friday, they're going to have a 5K. On the Saturday, they're going to have a 10K. And on the Sunday, they're going to have another 5K, but this will be the Infinity format. This is going to be set 10. Seems like a pretty cool event. Again, I've mentioned PPG are an awesome team. They did an awesome job with the DLCs last year, and I'd highly recommend attending any of their events. But Sky, there is also another event happening in
In Arkansas.
yes, tell us more about this.
So Fort Smith, Arkansas, there is a Sharp Gaming 13K weekend that's happening. I'm gonna be there. I'm excited about it. It is like one of the first, maybe the first big tournament of this set in North America. They're gonna have a bunch of singles, a bunch of good prices for sealed product. So come on down if you want to compete in this event and you've been putting in the work like I have in testing. I think it's a good chance for you to show your skill and benefit from that work that you put in early. So
Definitely, yeah. Awesome, awesome to see. All right, so jumping straight into the decks, Thiago, we're starting off with your set 10 purple steel. So I know you showed us a version last week, which I imagine ultimately was quite similar, but are you able to maybe walk through some of the changes that you went through with the deck over the past week?
Yeah, so basically last week when I first made the deck, it was under the assumptions that like people were going to kind of play a lot of what they have been playing, and now that we've kind of given the meta some time for a little bit of discovery, we've kind of seen the new top players. And so basically what that means is like a lot of the purple and mid-rangey decks that we saw in the previous meta are kind of going to take a step back for a lot of these like bigger blue or green decks. And so with that, we kind of have to adjust some of these card selections. Like we're kind of going back into some of our dock account at the cost of a card like Demona, which ends up really being poor into some of these big strategies who are able to empty their hand really quickly with their ramp spells and then ultimately have more ink to do powerful things with after the Demona refuels both players, as well as not really being as impactful on board because they have much bigger things that your random 3/3s and stuff don't trade super profitably into. Whereas if you were just playing like a Steel Mirror where you guys are both playing your curve outs, then your cards like Lexington and Black Heron and Captain Hook really take advantage of the Demona exerting their board. But when they're entire boards like 2/8s and 5/7s and 3/6s, it's really hard to get an advantage from that. And then I also greatly reduced the count of He Heraldus Thunderbolts just because it's a card that, in my opinion, it really polarizes your matchup spread where it's really good into the decks you're good against and really bad into the decks you're bad against. So when you put it into your deck, you become better in your good matchups and worse in your bad matchups, which ultimately is not really where Purple Steel wants to be. Purple Steel really wants to have game into everything, and so you want as flat of a matchup spread as possible. So I really wanted to reduce that count. I think it's still a super important card in like the Purple Mirrors and against something like Amber Steel, but again, those decks are not gonna be as popular as some of the big strategies, I don't think, and so that's kind of just accounting for that.
Talk to me about the inclusion of the Pete Games referee in here. I'm assuming this is against all of those kind of blue-green decks, maybe?
Yeah, there's just a bunch of decks that are playing like cards like Spooky Side or Under the Sea, and out with the Malicious, Mean, and Scary Prince Philip combo, you get to turn that off, which is really nice. A lot of these decks, sometimes you just play it on turn 3, and their plan is always to ramp on turn 2 and ramp on turn 3 as well to get into their big stuff. And so if they don't have Cinderella, then playing Pete Games Referee on the third turn just completely snowballs the game because they're having to pass their turn. But when they do have the Cinderella, obviously it's devastating. Pete is not a card I enjoy in the strategy. I think it's possible that you need more copies, but I think if Pete is a card you need 4 copies of in this style of Purple Steel, then it's probably just not the best position deck.
Sure, that makes sense. Sky, any thoughts on this deck so far? Have you played against this in anything you've been testing so far?
I have. I have played against Thiago on this quite a bit. It surprised me. Purple Steel was not a deck that I thought was gonna do super well with the inclusions. Like if you look at something like Lexington is like one of the new cards. You had like a genie, a 3-cost 3/4 evasive on your
Mm-hmm.
turn. Or was he just evasive?
No, he was evasive on
Yeah,
your
he was.
turn. Yep.
Okay, okay.
Yep.
So like it's like a trade-off of like you have one this gargoyle's text, which probably doesn't matter too much, but also you can't use him with Dumbo, right? Like that's
Yep.
kind of like if you look at this, the deck has way less targets for Dumbo, which isn't a huge thing, but like trading off one extra strength didn't seem super strong to me. So like these cards that go in didn't seem crazy. You have the Black Heron, which is just better than Raja, but Raja wasn't too crazy. I think it's rare that like you fire the cannon of Raja and like it makes the difference between the Black Heron and that. So not a lot of new cards. Like obviously Demona is a strong card, but it's only a one of, and it's taking the place of Doc. So maybe it's not even correct, or maybe it's still right to play 4 Doc. So a card that did surprise me though was the Hades, the
Mm-hmm.
5 cost. I think I slept on this card a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
there are some games where it like doesn't matter, and like in matchups where like you don't even care about giving them cards per se. Um, but there's plenty of games where like having those 2 cards is just crazy. So and like you always have to do it. Every deck, if they're playing it, they're either gonna ink it or they're gonna play it when they target something where they're gonna make you draw 2. So they can really just load up their hand and be like a huge spot where like, okay, they go super wide and they just play one strength and your biggest guy, and then all of a sudden they're back in the game the following turn. So like one thing that surprised me is just the amount of ink like this deck can have. If you go these cards where you play Hades and have like a lot of cards, you're getting like a ton of ink. Like the games we played, there's games where we went 8, even up to 9 ink maybe, and like that's a very strong thing to do with a deck that like will never miss. So like if it's a deck that's like going even into stuff and you still have like a top end of like, okay, my top end is just draw a bunch of cards and then go super wide and like have one strength, and like that's fine. That's like a game plan that is almost as strong as like some of these more like combo heavy type decks. So I think the deck is good. I'm kind of scared of it. I definitely have my eyes on it for something, for this weekend. I got to get games with it, but I think it's solid.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things you mentioned there about the difference between the Lexington and the Genie. Like, the Lexington is so much better if you're in a mirror match or if you're against maybe a Blurple player to take out stuff like Genies really easily. But yes, granted, against something like a green-blue or a slower deck, it's not going to have so much of an impact. And also, there's no more inclusions of Bell, right? Bell's kind of been taken out to make sure you could fit in like these Hades and these Demonas, which again, I think that kind of makes sense. Bell is a card that is really good in those mid-rangey matchups, but this Hades is just, yeah, it's pretty much going to be drawing you to most of the time. I already want to insert the clip of Thiago's first impression of the Hades here, but, I don't know if you remember, Sky, but Thiago was not very high on this card, and I've been kind of holding it against him ever since.
Yeah, I do remember it. I wasn't high on it either. I thought it was like maybe it's okay, but like it's definitely good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Purple Steel ends up being in like a similar place to how it was last set, where you're kind of not super interested in playing against the most popular deck, which is going to be Green Blue. I think that the deck just got a lot slower, and Green Blue got a lot of new tools, so I think that that matchup is like pretty poor for Purple Steel. But ultimately, you can just like win the die roll and then like curve out and kill their shift targets. So it's very similar to how the Blurple matchup was in the previous set. And then you're like pretty good into everything else, which is like a very similar spread to how Purple Steel was before. I think there's like a very delicate balance between trying too hard to beat blue-green, where like you're only increasing that matchup like slightly, and then you're really giving up in your other matchups. So I think you really want to position the deck in a way where you're really strong into everything else, and then even if it costs you percentage points into green-blue. But yeah, I think that's ultimately where the deck's going to have to land, is like somewhere where it's really beating up on all of the other decks that we see in the meta.
Makes sense, yeah. Similar position, as you said, to what it was within the Fabled meta. But I think this deck still has so much gas that it can turn on, right? It's like in those matchups where you feel like you kind of need to win, you've still got your Cobras, you've still got your White Roses, and, some of these cards are still not very easy for green-blue to deal with unless they draw some of these specific cards. But yeah, I mean, we'll get into talking about green-blue soon, but taking a look at the next deck, we have Thiago's Green Purple. This is a deck that didn't really have too much of a chance to shine last set. I know last week you showed off the version that was similar to like Lorcana Justice's set 9 version with like the Shift Cuscos and stuff. That was kind of just a deck that was sort of built to try and just beat Blurple. But now this is a very, very different build. Looks more traditional, more like the deck that we're used to seeing from somebody like Artabax, like, kind of this EA tempo build, a deck that was very popular within set 8 with your Go-Go's and your kind of Curse Merfolks, and this deck can really turn on the gas. So, yeah, talk to me about this build a little bit.
Yeah, so a lot of the problems that Purple Steel has into some of the big blue decks, the green cards that you get access to alongside your purple cards, if you're playing this kind of style in green-purple, end up really helping you in that matchup. So cards like this Webby Vanderquack just completely solo the blue decks, and then also having access to like cheap 2-questers like Curse Merfolk and Bonsai. This deck certainly doesn't have the tools that Purple Steel does in the form of Strength of Raging Fire and Thunderbolt, but you do have Ursula Deceiver to help combat when you're playing against those kind of decks, so you don't really fall behind that much, because if they're able to resolve one of those free songs, it can be really devastating because they're trading 0 ink for like 3 or 4 ink on your side. But the Ursula helps keep them off of it, and then now that they have Thunderbolt in their deck, it's an uninkable song, so they can't just like ink their Strength of Raging Fire and make your turn really inefficient by forcing you to like play this 2-mana 1/3 that ends up not hitting anything. So the Ursula is also good against cards like Malicious, Mean, and Scary to take them off of it, and then of course in the Steel Mirrors it's good. And you really get to take advantage of some of these new cards like the Hades and the Demona in a way that is better than the way that Purple Steel can deal with them. So it's been a lot of fun. I do think that the like Brainiac Cusco Shift versions are probably the best way to play green purple. I think those decks are like somewhat pretty decent just because they were like really bad into green blue, but like they also get to play Webby now, so
Yeah.
then it like kind of fixes that a little bit. But yeah, I mean this deck's been a ton of fun. So
Yeah. Sky, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this Aquila card, because I think this is one that you were kind of high on when we did like a bit of a set review, right? I think.
Yeah, I actually really like that card. I think like cards always have the option to like buff and like threaten to hit for something, especially with a like something with 5 toughness is very good. You're probably not swinging with it and buffing it very much, but like I said, just the threat of that's is very good. So I like to see that card in here, but I don't really like this archetype. I think honestly, in the history of Lorcana, I've never thought green purple was in a good spot, and I don't see it here being in a better spot. This kind of just reminds me of like purple steel, but you don't have strength. Instead of strength, you have like this pull the lever, like wrong lever instead, and like that is not super
I feel
great.
like Sky's been a
Um,
steel main forever. He's like, I refuse to play any other combination without steel, because I
I mean
understand,
I
right? You like the
have like
removal, right? Yeah, yeah.
for sure, yeah. That it's usually the removal pack. The one thing I like about this deck is the Webby. Like the Webby is like I've come to learn that it's like a necessary evil to go in second. Like you need to play this against like blue decks. Even going first, sometimes if they're ramping, you can get a trigger on it. And it's pretty good. And having ward is great too. But other than that, like I don't really see what you're gaining too much from this, other than like Ursula, I guess too. But I think you're just kind of um, it's not bad. Like green purple's like the deck that I feel like tricks so many people into beat like playing it because they thought it was like this good angle shoot into the meta, but it was like always just suboptimal below like the next best deck. So then like they really like the color pairing, so like they went with it. I think it's probably the same this meta. Maybe I'm missing something, but um yeah, maybe Webby's good enough to where it's like having not having strength is worth the playing green purple.
I kind of like the build of this from just like an initial view of the deck, where I feel like it has a little bit more aggression in it for its start, which can be important against maybe some of these blue decks. But then also, like the whole idea of green purple, the thing that I liked at least was back in say like the set 8 meta. If you're against something like red blue, it would be kind of tough at times, and like they'd play a shark and you'd okay, I don't really have any removal for this unless I'm playing like my pull the lever. But then sometimes uh you try and not trick your opponent, but a lot of the time it's like, oh, if I leave something open for their shark to hit, they can hit it and I can play a go-go to get some value. So I think there's like some mind games that are involved from different versions of green purple that you play as well. But ultimately I think if you're the better player you're against, then the less likely they are to like, oh, I guess I could just like hit into this, and then they get like giga go-go value and stuff like that. But yeah, sorry, Thiago, you were gonna say something.
yeah, I just think that like against the really big strategies like the blue decks, the removal spells are like generally pretty poor. Like Strength of Raging Fire is not like the game-breaking card that it is in like the board-based Steel Mirrors. So if we end up seeing like a lot of those decks taking up a gigantic amount of the meta share, then I think something like this that has these smaller angles to attack them with while still keeping the consistency of the purple cards is a reasonable way to attack those decks.
Sure.
I guess I'm also one card that I just have always kind of hated is Merfolk, and I think more than ever, like Tinkerbell is one. It's very good against this type of deck. You want like Blue Steel wants to be playing a Tinkerbell on as fast as possible. So sweeping that up is bad, and then also Green Blue has Malicious, Mean, and Scary. And if your angle of like beating Green Blue is to play this early and get like a like 8 free lore off of it, like that's like honestly a reasonable answer to just like do 1 damage to the board and take it out. So like it's not great, but like it is like another thing that turns off that like classic. Okay, I'm going into my control matchup. I need to just like try to find 2 Merfolk and like win the game with it.
That is a very fair point, yeah, especially with Tinkerbell very much coming into the meta within Blue Steel. Of course, it was previously, but with I also think Blue Steel got a little bit better this set, so it's definitely some good points you
Yeah, I
make.
remember back in like set 2 and 3, it was like, oh, like you just leave the Merfolk there. Don't fire the cannon, guys. We're play a Tinkerbell or like on turn 4, and we just clean it up. It's fine. They can take 4 free lore. They're just setting themselves up to lose later.
Yeah, yeah. Um, All right, Tiago, talk to us about your next deck, red, purple.
Yeah, this deck is a just curve out pile. Like you're just playing all of these really big statted red and purple cards, and then you are taking advantage of the Headless Horseman as kind of like your. It kind of plays a similar role to what the songs play in the steel decks, where you play it on turn 5, and then it develops a body while also taking something out. So if you're playing against decks that have genies or Tianas and stuff like that, then it's like really game breaking. But ultimately, like I think a deck like this really struggles from not having Strength of Raging Fire. So I think this deck's like if you're teaching somebody how to play the game, this is like exactly how
It's
Lorcana was
the
meant to be
curve
played. It's
out
just a
deck.
pile. It's
Yeah.
a pile of 60 characters, and then you just play a bunch of big stats every turn, and it's really hard to deal with. So, yeah, this deck kind of dominates a lot of the more aggressive strategies. But yeah, it definitely has some holes because it's a pile of 60 characters.
Yeah, it's really well statted deck though, I have to say. And there's like one thing I'd probably be curious to hear your opinion on. I probably already know the answer, but because the Goliath is in here and you've got like the Bronx and the Brooklyn, uh, I'm assuming the Brooklyn is in here very much just a combo with that Goliath because I know there's like another. There's basically like a 2-cost inkable 3/3 that just quests for 1 within red. And I think it's like a Shere Khan. I'm assuming that's the reason you play this Brooklyn is just like yeah, it's gonna combo with the Goliath and then also with the Lumiere maybe it takes out a genie or something.
Yeah, exactly. It works well with Lumiere, and then it just like we have this very light gargoyle package just because these cards are like pretty good on their own, and then if you draw them together, then they like you get a little bit of an extra bonus. So yeah, I think the Shere Khan's also fine, but the if you're able to empty your hand size a bit, then the Brooklyn gets some free lore that the Shere Khan wouldn't, and then it's also even if you don't have the Lumiere, then it can be like difficult for them to quest with their genie just because they're like scared of you playing Lumiere and trading. So I think overall it's just like a pretty reasonable card. And then um, it importantly like different from the Surhis type cards
Yep.
that have the stat line, it doesn't have 1 health. So like that's one of the reasons why I don't like the Violet Saberwing in
Yep.
Purple Steel is just because like Sky said in the last deck list about Merfolk, like it has 1 health. So like a lot of these decks that play all these 1 health characters can get cleaned up by that. So you are able to avoid that by playing the Brooklyn while still getting the benefit of like cheating like a few lore here and there.
Sure. Yep. All right, we're on to the deck. We're on. I'm very personally. I'm very happy to hear that green blue is doing well. It got a lot of cool tools. Yeah, I imagine it's not everybody's particular play style, but instead of just giving an overview, because I think we've kind of been talking about it already, and we'll obviously get into it a little bit more. To start off talking about this deck, how do you feel this deck is in, I guess, the mirror match? Is it still probably similar to what the mirror match was already? If you actually expect a lot of mirrors, maybe you could sneak something like a bend in here to try and be a little bit better. And that's probably the easier things to say. Um, Sky, I'll ask you. I know this is definitely a deck that you probably don't have any experience playing too many mirror matches with, but I guess
Yeah, I played set 7 when it was like not played at all.
sure,
So,
sure,
but I can give a little bit because I did
sure.
play quite a few mirrors this last few days. I think the mirror is actually super skill intensive. At least at the start of this set, it seems like, yeah, there's those games where they just have stuff like bend and like you kind of get blown out. But like I noticed like a lot of the small decisions can like really set you up, and you can kind of play around like stuff that they probably want to do. So I think it's actually one of the more skill intensive mirrors, and you can probably win like a decent amount of more games than your opponent just by having more experience and playing more correctly on the deck. Um, this deck is like one that I thought when I first played it was like going to be like for sure the tyrant of the format.
Hmm.
But the more games I've played, the more I've noticed it's like kind of just the exact same deck. Like there's Malicious Mean and Scary and Prince Philip, and that's kind of nice. And it's kind of nice to have Prince Philip be part of that because he's just a big body as well. Um, but honestly, like that doesn't happen in many games that people are playing like, you know, like good curves. People are playing their deck correctly and have no, they're putting on the gas and the pressure for you. So um, I think the deck just kind of ends up in the same spot as it did last set, where it's maybe slightly better because you have something like Cindy, which is just crazy. Like Cindy is like this deck's like best like place to absolutely get abused, especially if you go, if you're going first and you go Cindy and then to another Cindy, you're just like infinite ink. If you have the combo, you have a decent amount of cards. If you have the combo, they're just done. Like it seems pretty good for that. But honestly, the deck kind of feels the same.
If you can somehow go sail into Cindy, that's kind of disgusting, no? Like where, because you're
Yeah,
just going
sail
straight
into
to
Cindy
7,
into
right? Yeah.
yeah, sail into Cindy and then like play like a 1-cost Clara plus another Cindy, and then like you hit like have a bunch of cards. You can shift the Clara. You can sing your welcome. You can do like a bunch of stuff. They're also just like they're 4 costs, so like 2 Cindy's can sing it Under the Sea if you want. Like it's crazy to think like the singing power of these Cindy's.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that people are building this deck. This is like one example using the detective package with Judy Hops that some people are trying. Last week we showed like a more classic version, and we also showed like a Webby version, which I mean I still am unconvinced about Webby and specifically the green-blue combination, even though like she's definitely a strong card. In this specific version, you also get access to the turn 3 Under the Sea combo with Basil on turn 1, Tivo on turn 2, and then
Yep.
you're able to shift the 6-cost Basil on the 1-cost Basil and sing Under the Sea against the aggressive decks. So that's super strong in that matchup. But I do personally prefer like the more classic versions with Donald Perfect Gentleman, just because he's a bit of a more resilient card draw tool than the Judy Hops
Judy,
is.
yeah.
But and then when you're both drawing cards, his effect like plays better into a deck that wants to play Bent to My Will, which a lot of people are cutting right now, but I predict that it'll be a pretty important card in this metagame, especially if there's a lot of blue-green. But as exactly what Sky said, the deck feels very similar. Like it's not really that you're able to like hold this Prince Philip combo throughout the game because you're a Clarabelle deck. So it's like kind of one of those things that like after you Clarabelle, you're welcome them. Then if you draw into the Prince Philip combo, it's like super strong and closes the game. But like that's kind of just what your deck was trying to do before, and you were like already in a really good position then. So like yes, the deck did get quite a bit stronger, but I think that it's like very plays somewhat similarly to before, and you just like win a slightly higher percentage amount of the games. But I think like there's definitely ways to combat this in the meta, and so it's going to be interesting to see what people sort of come up with.
I think it's actually very important that this deck got something like, well, okay, maybe Cindy is very, very good to get, but basically, you always want to be shifting, or at least traditionally, you always wanted to be shifting with this deck, right? You always wanted to be shifting your Clarabelle, and kind of, if you didn't hit your shift line, the 4 drops you could kind of play into. It was usually just that Donald that was always the best option, right? Some people played like he does, some people played Scrooges, but I think it's important that not only do you have the Cindy in here, but you do also have something else like the Judy, or at least that something else could be the Donald, because you want other options. Like we're going to get into when we talk about Blue Steel with Sky. If you go for the Cindy, yes, it is extremely powerful, and that's what you want to be hitting every single game, essentially. But it's also important to have some of these other options. So I actually kind of like the idea of the Judy Hops in here. Again, I haven't done any testing on this specific build, but especially if you really don't have your shift line and you're really trying to get to your 7-drop, if you play Judy and then somehow you even find your 5-cost Donald, that's a pretty good curve. Again, depending on the deck that you're playing against, but I just like that idea of like, okay, I've kind of haven't gotten my shift line. Let me get my Judy down. Let me also try and get my Donald. Maybe the 4-cost Donald is still just better because you're going to still be just drawing some extra cards. You still have a chance of finding your 5-cost Donald Duck, but I think it's an interesting inclusion, and there's definitely enough good detective characters in this particular deck that I mean, I'm no Frank Karsten, but like Thiago, did you run any numbers or like roughly, this is probably an optimal amount of detectives to be playing for Judy?
Yeah, it's a fine number. You can like max the 3 of detectives to 4 ofs, and then that increases it a little more. You can also add, there's a 6-cost Judy Hops, which gives like alert and resist too. You can add a couple copies of that, but if you're in the 18 to 24 range, it's like pretty good, especially since typically she has her on play effect and her on quest effect. So you'll generally not be losing too much card advantage on average from your whips, but
She's
yeah, I
worse
mean,
against
honestly,
something like Purple Steel though, right? Because if they can like strength your 4-drop, it's pretty rough, and that's where the Donald might shine a little bit better.
yeah, the 5 health points from Donald's really good, but also like Donald just like draws you into your spells, which are typically like your more powerful cards. Like the quality of card you're getting from GD Hops like varies very drastically. Like even though you have 18 detectives or 20 detectives or whatever, like getting a 1-drop Basil is very different from getting a 7 or 6 cost
Yeah,
Basil.
yeah.
So the Donald Duck being able to assemble your combo pieces for your Prince Philip combo and things like that can be really important. But yeah, this deck getting Cinderella is obviously a huge upgrade. It makes you way more resilient to the cards that attack your shift targets, and it's one of the big reasons why the deck feels more resilient now is because of Cinderella.
Sure.
Yeah, Judy was crazy, and I tried this version with Judy, and like I kept finding myself wanting to like put in the old like Pleakley and other things that if I miss Cinderella I can still double ramp, or like like even Webby. Like I was like, okay, if I keep finding the mirror, and like when people play Webby against me in the mirror, it's like so bad. Like they're like just completely in the game still because they can just keep getting free cards with Webby to ramp with. Um, but then like I just wanted to fit everything in the deck, and I was like, you have to either choose like this detective package or like this more classic package. And I honestly think like the cards you lose from like the Prince Philip and Malicious Mean and Scary like are probably not even worth like what you give up versus like just the old Under the Sea plus the Heads Held High package. So like I'm gonna make like a small prediction, say that like there's a good chance that the old version without this Prince Philip and Malicious Mean and Scary actually like ends up coming back and being like more in favor. Because there's like plenty of matchups still where like the shift Under the Sea early is like the way you win still, and like this can't do that at all. I mean, you have Under the Sea and you can still do the shift, but you're like kind of half playing around it with these type of like builds. So like there's like benefits for sure in multiple factors to going back to just the old classic build, and like a lot of it's just like the space with Prince Philip and Malicious Mean and Scary.
I think the
Yeah, I'll
ratios are
say
going to
that
be interesting. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Tiago.
when I was talking about the more classic version, I just mean like without the detective package. So like it's playing somewhat similar to what we saw last set with the addition of Cinderella, Malicious Maid, and Scary and Prince Philip. So that's a very, very bold prediction from Sky that you guys have to make sure to tag him on Twitter and make fun of him when the Prince Philip combo
Yes,
is dominating.
please,
But
please
yeah,
do.
you will look like a genius if that does come true.
Yep. All right, moving on to the next deck, we have your Blurple deck, Tiago. I did spend like at least one day of testing with you, and this is one of the matchups that we tested, and it was just, it was absolutely ridiculous. It was basically like, oh, yep, I found my guidebooks. Oh, I found my Tamatoa. Oh, I'm playing Visions. Oh, found another Tamatoa. And I think the game we played, like, we both ended the game with something like 10 cards in our deck or something. We drew through so many cards. But the interesting addition, at least from what I'm seeing here, is maybe you've kind of looked at the other decks and said, hey, this Cinderella card's pretty good. And now this Cinderella is actually in the Blurple deck. So talk to me about your thought process with that.
Yeah, so this is just like a kind of stock looking Blurple deck that it's obviously not one of my favorite archetypes, but it's something that we're going to see a lot of, and a lot of people are going to just transfer what they played last set to now, right? So they got the addition of Junior Witchit Guidebook, which when paired with Tamatoa can be pretty crazy. Like Kawa and I played one Blurple mirror, and it took us like 41 minutes, and we drew 54 cards each, and it was like really, really disgusting. But the Cinderella is, I think, of all of the blue archetypes, it is the worst in Blurple, just because you already have Genie, which is another uninkable 4-drop, and then Blurple really wanted to ramp to Genie and then play like Genie 5 cost, like Genie Elsa Bell or Genie Elsa Elsa or something like that. And then the Cinderella like skips you from 4 to 6, so you're not playing a Genie on turn 4 and you're not playing a 5-drop on 5, and then the 5-drop that you would typically play on 6 sync like needs you to have curved before because it's like another Elsa or a Belle or something that needs you to be on board already. So I think it's like less good, less broken in this deck than it is in some other decks, but ultimately it's still a super powerful card. You're already playing Belle, which is another princess, and so Cinderella is obviously super broken on her own, but if you have any additional princesses, then that's like even better. And yeah, we get to play Monstro now, which is really good when you draw a bajillion cards with Junior Witchit Guidebook. And then you also get to utilize the Hades, which is like obviously a super solid card. But yeah, just like classic Blurple, if you love this archetype, then you're a menace to society. But here's the deck list.
I kind of get the idea though of the Cindy, at least in theory, more so than from, again, I haven't tested with the Cindy, but if you think about it, the 6 cost slot has always been the slot that's been very weird for Blurple, and now of course the Tamatoa coming in here helps out, but you're still never going to want to play the Tamatoa on curve because you're not playing your guidebooks on curve, right? So in theory, it's kind of okay. It's not like the best 4 drop in terms of a body and trying to like represent stuff on the board. But what it allows you to do is if on your next turn you're still just going to play your 5 drop and do your normal thing, then that actually leads you into your Hades on what would be your 6 ink potentially. So yeah, in theory I can kind of see it working, and then yeah, even like it's a weird one, but even if you just play the Cinderella and then just hard cast the bell to get the other trigger, maybe that's also good enough as well, and then suddenly you're on plenty of ink. One card I want to talk to you about because I think I don't know if you actually even included it in your deck on the podcast last week, but it's one card we played with, which was oh my god, I can't even remember the name of it. It was like spooky something as well. So there's 4 cost inkable Sapphire card that you can ink one of your you send one of your opponent's cards to the inkwell, but then they ink the top card of your deck. All I remember from our testing was basically, yeah, before we even played, Thiago's like, yeah, these Blurple mirrors have been really weird. We both end up on like, 24 ink, 25 ink. I don't know what's going on. And then I told him what this card did. He was like, oh, it also inks the top card of your opponent's deck. Oh, that makes sense why we're both on so much so. But that card is still interesting to think about because I think the later the game goes on, and that was actually very much the case in our testing, the later the game goes on, the more that just becomes kind of a hard removal tool. But is it something you kind of moved away from and overall is maybe a little bit unnecessary?
Yeah, I think it's definitely always a super solid card. I think for some reason I just thought it was 4 mana ink one of their cards for
Bro, that's
hardcast, but
such a good
I just
card.
thought it was like inkable Dragonfire. I was like, wait, this card's insane, but then it also ramps them. I was like, I think it's like pretty good when you weave it in like after your Hades, you have like a 4+4 turn, or on in 9 ink you have like a 4+5 turn. You get to play it with like a big character. But yeah, it's a good option. You can play it, and it's not like a super important card or anything. But yeah, if people are playing a lot of these big decks, then it's definitely a decent option.
Yeah, for sure. Um, all right, Sky, it's your time to shine. Amber Steel, your favorite deck from Fabled. How is it looking at the moment?
I think it's still very good. In my testing, yeah, there's more answers to Tiana, but how many of them are being played? And at the same time, like it's still like can still drop Ron too, and she's still very tough to deal with. The deck feels like pretty much the exact same. We just get Mowgli, and Mowgli is like a pretty insane card at like messing up the parts that really can kind of deconstruct your board state with Tiana. So like uh Blurple, if like they need like a into the unknown and you just play like a Lady Mowgli after your Tiana, you probably just win the game on the spot. Versus Purple Steel, like if you're going first, they're like one way back is maybe they strength the Tiana because you missed a strength. Like all of a sudden, that's another avenue where if you miss a strength, you can still like win the game like for sure on the play, which is nice. Versus Blue Green, he like really is just great at discarding a card. Like oftentimes, um, they have to play so proactively that like even if they have the Under the Sea plus like another spell that they can just discard with it, just taking away that card, they're playing so aggressively that they don't have time to draw a bunch of cards. So like that can just completely take them off their game plan. So he's like extremely good. Like Mowgli is like a fantastic card. Um, Other than that though, like there is the stuff with like Rapunzel and I think Alanwi,
Yep.
the 1 cost 2/1 support. Those cards are fine. I tried them. I don't think it's worth the slots. It's nice to have an extra princess that's a 1 cost with Aurora, and maybe just a couple Alanwi is worth. But other than that, I think really just Mowgli is like the big change in the deck, and a couple of things that like changed around it with just like a little bit extra Lilo. Playing Mowgli is like a little bit less tempo because he only quests for 1. If you're playing that on turn 4, you like need a good double spell to hit with it. So having like a maxed out Lilo count, so like we have better odds to having Lilo in the discard. And then on turn 4, you can play the Mowgli with the Lilo, and you're like essentially draw a card. So it's a little bit slower with the Mowgli, but like honestly, like the deck just seems still very good. You're doing the same thing as last set, and you're putting the pressure on, and decks still have to respond to that. Strength is still crazy. Fire the Cannon still seems very good. Cannon's, I guess, the one thing that like as the meta shapes might change a little bit because the importance of the 1 cost slot versus in the meta might change a little bit. Some decks might not really care about playing like a 1 cost as much. So But yeah, the deck is still great. Strength and Tiana are still crazy cards. You just get Mowgli.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is actually something I wanted to ask you specifically about because the Fire the Cannons was a card that was like so integral to the deck's game plan in the previous meta. It was like a card that most of the Ember Steel players would like literally keep in every single matchup, player draw, no matter what. And it was like really important to protect your Aurora or to take out like I know in Purple Steel it took out like the Rajas and Cobras, which is not the case anymore now that they're playing like Black Heron and Lexington and stuff like that. And against decks like Blurple, like you needed to kill their one drop so they don't bounce it with elephant, but like now they're playing much fewer one drops and much fewer elephants, and like against blue green, like they're not playing as many shift targets and are trying to just ramp to 7. And so a lot of the power that it had in the last meta, it seems like maybe it's less so the case now. So where do you kind of see Fire the Cannons positioned?
Yeah, I could definitely see it going down to like cutting copies or even going down to none. I'm playing against blue green. Like that's one benefit of them going much harder to this like Prince Philip malicious mean and scary strategy is that I honestly don't even have to like cannon some of their targets. Like they're not playing these targets. They're not playing Baymax for sure. So like I don't have to respect that anymore. So um, and yeah, like you said, Purple Steel it's a little bit worse. There's a lot of matchups where it got a little bit worse. And if it gets so much worse, there's like a line that it crosses to where okay, I just play different one cost. I'll play like two of the Elanwi and like play a third Pluto or something. So I think it's pretty reasonable that like it might not be good enough. It just depends. Like Blurple could still be like a very good deck, and taking out the one drop, even if they don't play heavy elephants, is still like super important to that. So it really just depends on the meta. Like I think I could see myself going down to no copies for sure.
I think against blue green, it's very, very interesting because, in a sense, it's still important to try and cut off their shift target if it is a potential for them with the Clarabelle. And then, as you mentioned, Thiago, like it doesn't completely cut them off if they want to do the shift Basil line, right? Because that is still something to consider is that they can still like shift. They can play Basil on one, then Tipo, and then shift the 6 cost Basil and do Under the Sea, and that's probably like if they sit down and they're against an Amber Steel player, that's the opening they probably need to really win the game. Like they're not going to be able to gig a ramp to a Princeville, and then also again, I'm not sure in what final decks are going to look like, but the specific version that we saw that you had actually cut John Silver's as well, which is a card that is extremely important and really helps you kind of claw your way back against an Amber Steel deck. So I don't know. I can actually see maybe Fire the Cannons come down a little bit, but I feel like it might still have a pretty necessary place within the meta. So I'm very, very interested to see how this deck is going to slightly evolve. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of been the same shell for the most part. But that's kind of cool. Also, it just proves that this deck is like super super solid. It kind of has its game plan. It does what it does. The Rapunzel Alonwi stuff is kind of cute and maybe has some cool synergy there. Like I know I played against you were playing this deck Thiago against me, and you did like you like protected your Pluto with the Rapunzel, and it was just like yeah, there's just nothing I can do against that. But granted, yeah, then a card that the first time it would take damage, maybe it's not as important against some decks that I don't know. Not that you're going to be playing. You're welcome against this deck a lot, but there are other ways to maybe navigate against it. Does still protect against at least the wait, does it protect against the malicious, mean and scary? Because that puts damage counters on it, right?
It puts one damage counter, so no.
Yeah, so never mind. Yeah.
So
It's really mostly for the steel decks, like you play it and then it protects you from getting Strength of Raging fired, and then if your Tiana doesn't get Strength of Raging fired, then like you can completely snowball the game. But ultimately, I think you have to add like too many one questers in your deck that it ends up making you too slow, and then it also ends up playing a similar role that Troubadour and Mowgli are already playing against the steel decks. So I think ultimately it's probably worse. And yeah.
yeah, I think Rapunzel is like in theory it's good, and like protecting a Pluto with a Tiana is probably just the game. But one, you're probably in a good enough spot if your Tiana is on the board with a Pluto. Usually strength is enough for sure in that situation. And also Rapunzel like doesn't have like a great turn you want to drop her, because she needs to be established early to get the effect right away when the turn that you want it. And she's just terrible. She's terrible playing on 2. So like you're giving up your strongest, like your first 3 turns are so important of setting up. So if you're giving up like, even if you have an Aurora might just get traded into by a 1 cost if you play the Rapunzel plus something else. on turn 2, and that's like the best case scenario because you're just playing like a one cost into Rapunzel is like too slow versus most stuff. You'd much rather just play like a triple one cost, or on the draw play like a Troubadour or something.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. All right, getting into Blue Steel, one of Sky's favorite decks, and I've seen many different builds floating around the internet. I know Thiago's built a few, which we'll get into a little bit after Sky's build. I also want to give a huge shout out to Create or Adrian. He is like a Blue Steel pioneer. I feel like every week his deck changes and he's trying like different brews. And he was one of the people that I actually met at DLC Milwaukee, and he brought that deck to the event, and a lot of people performed decently well with the deck. So yeah, but this is where we get into things, Sky, and this is also where we talk about. We look at the 4 cost cards and we say, okay, there's one 4 cost card you want to be hitting in terms of a character, and it's Cinderella. So is this one of those decks that you were talking about where it's like hitting the Cindy feels amazing and missing it, it's just kind of the game?
Yeah, this deck like needs Cinderella so bad. Like what you can do with Cinderella is so much stronger because you run 8 spells that she can sing, 4 strength, 4 he hurled his thunderbolt. So like having the ramp like gives you an extra card, like is fantastic. Like not having to play double sail is great. While being able to threaten to sing the thunderbolt or the strength, and then like the following turn after Cindy, like if you have all that together, like and you drop like a Goliath going first, like that's like the exact thing the deck wants to do. So like having the Cindy is like so important. I want to like I want to play Pleakley because I want a plan B. I never like playing like this type of style where it's just like all in on this one card. But it's so much worse because Pleakley can't sing He Hurled His Thunderbolt. He Hurled His Thunderbolt's like the better spell on that turn because you're only gonna have like 3 characters. That's not always gonna hit something relevant. Um, but it's like so much worse that like I don't want to do it. And like I mean I'm playing 8/1 costs, but the rest of the deck is so streamlined that like fitting a Pleakley in and having it be a bad top deck is like it's not good.
Yeah,
Um,
it's super interesting you mentioned Pleakley because that is obviously a card I've seen included in a lot of other decks, and it is probably, yeah, if you kind of miss your Cindy, it's the option you can go for. Um, while I agree that yes, Pleakley is pretty rough as a top deck later in the game, especially when you want to be hitting a lot of your big bombs. You do have your visions, which is going to help to try and find your better targets, but there was like some scenarios I ran into when I was playtesting a Blue Steel deck against Thiago where I kind of noticed as I was top decking, like, let's just give myself a scenario where I have 0 cards in hand and I top deck a Cinderella. Okay, that's not really great, but I never want to drop that Cinderella because then if one of my next top decks is something like a Pleakley, right, then I can just
yeah,
play
it's like the same thing as Mulan. Like sometimes you want to hold it for the
Sure,
next card.
exactly right. So it's like one of those situations where Pleakley in a deck where maybe you're able to activate the Cinderella isn't the worst. Again, there's kind of some specific draws, but it's either a card you're going to be inking, or if sometimes you draw it in the late game, it's more like a filter card, right? You can like somehow maybe trigger your Cinderella and then filter your Pleakley. But I've also seen some builds, and it's actually somebody I want to give a shout out to Taylor in my office in Card Market. He's a big Blue Steel player, and he built a very similar version to this. Granted, that has another card we're going to talk about with Thiago, the 8-cost Headless Horseman. But he also had the Pleakley package, but he still was trying to play like the Jasmines, but not so much for the allies, because there was like the main allies you're really only still going to be hitting now are like the Tipos, the Tinkerbells, the Vincenzos, which are good. But I think he wanted to do it so that he could do the Shift Jasmine and then just do the Pleakley line instead, because I think he just liked that opener alternatively too. And if you do happen to get a card off your Jasmine, it's still pretty good.
I actually tried the Jasmine build. I initially thought that was still going to be the best way because they're princesses. It works with Cinderella well.
Sure.
And like there's also we have He Herald His Thunderbolt, which is 4.
Yes, that's another good reason he told me as well. Yeah.
And like there is some interesting curves where you can like double spell with the shift and then sing and then like do a dock or something like that, and it's very strong. But honestly, like I tried to make that work a lot, and what I noticed was just like you kind of have to just play big stuff like that. The double spells are like maybe worth it sometimes. Like another card I was looking at was like Lexington with that because he's like cheap and we're playing dock, and like sometimes there's a good double spell with like a Lexington plus a spell or something. and it's worth, but he's also an ally, which worked well with Jasmine.
Hmm.
But if people play like meta decks and they're playing their standard curves, you like have to just drop your 6 and 7 costs on curve. You have to just go Cindy into like a Tinkerbell or a Hades, or a Cindy into a Goliath on play. And that leads me to my next point of Goliath. Goliath is
Yep.
like the other card that's kind of like Cindy. Like on the play, he's like you have Doc, but it's not quite as good into a lot of the matchups. But Goliath on the play just is absolutely insane. If you go just Tipo into Cindy into Goliath, you can even like sing the he hurled his thunderbolts,
Hmm.
and like you're at no cards then, and it's like a super super good curve. It's fantastic against like green blue. It gets them to like for sure discard on the play. I'd say most decks they're at least discarding one or two if you're on the play and you do this. Um, and yeah, it's me and Thiago talked about this last night, but one of the things that makes Goliath so strong is that you get the benefit immediately, and then your opponent, even if they get the benefit, your Goliath lives and you get the benefit next turn. But if they
Hmm.
deal with the Goliath, they don't get the benefit. It's like it's a really like sticky card that like there's no really good way out if you play it. And so if you play him and get the benefit at first and you have the time to establish him, he's like super strong and can kind of just win games.
So hard to remove as well. It's just this 6/5, and it's so noticeable now that this Zeus Junior
Yeah,
no
he's a
longer deals
tank.
5, right? So, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, this
for sure.
this deck is super resilient into Zeus. You have like Tinkerbell and Amari and Goliath and Hades. Like all of these cards just survive Zeus, which is like another reason why a lot of the decks are kind of moving away from it. But in this deck where you get your singers out so quickly and strength is much worse in this deck, then it's like an all-star in here. But like this Goliath, every time you play it on the play, it's like so devastating. Like the blue decks just have like so many big things that like they end up having to discard with it, or like even if you're just playing like a curve out deck like Purple Steel, like if they play Goliath, like they're always ramping on the second and third turn, right? So they play Goliath on turn 4 because they have 6 ink. And then like I'm looking at my hand, I have like 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop in play, and my hand is like 3 cards. I have like 3 or 4 cards, and then I go like, I guess I'm playing a genie here, and then I don't have enough like bodies on the board to strength there. Goliath, especially if they played Cinderella on turn 3 and then turn 4 alongside the Goliath, they sang Thunderbolts to kill my singer. Then I'm just like unable to kill this Goliath. I like played Genie, so I played 1 card this turn, so my hand size is still big. The Genie drew me an additional card. So like even against the like faster decks, like Goliath is still so devastating on the play. Um, but something I did want to ask you about is the inclusion of Doc. It's a card that we have seen in the past in combination with Beyond the Horizon, and then now it seems like it's more typical to just see people playing Beyond the Horizon. So I'd be curious to see what your thoughts are on playing 4 Doc, not playing a split, playing all Docs and no Beyond the
Beyonds.
Horizons,
Yeah.
and just the the 2 different cards and what you like about each.
Yeah, so this is one thing that I think I could maybe convinced of, depending on the meta, that Beyond the Horizon might be slightly better than Doc, or that you're supposed to split it. Problem with Beyond the Horizon is like it's great like in the games where you have the time to sing with like your 7 drop or something. But honestly, like there's so many games where like you need to like threaten, or like you need to swing with the things. And like Beyond the Horizon, like yes, it draws 3, but also Doc is a body, so like it improves your strength numbers. There are some good double spells later that happen. Like on turn 7, you can go like Namari plus a Doc is fairly strong. You're also playing like a lot of songs in this deck. We're playing 8, so like there are plenty of hands where like we're able to sing and swing and then play a Doc and like do an effective double spell, and it's like very solid. I think Beyond the Horizon is fine, but it's also not compatible with the curves where we don't have like a Scindian to Goliath. Like Doc fulfills a role where like if we don't have that, we can just like play a 1 cost plus a Doc, and it's kind of like a fine turn as well. Whereas like Beyond the Horizon, you just can't ever hard cast it. So I don't know. I think it's close. I was a big Beyond the Horizon hater for a long time. But I think last set it was actually worth it to play it with the Doc. But now we have Goliath, so I think it's probably not worth playing like a big clunky uninkable. Even though you have stuff like Namari and Mulan, they don't always get to come down. Sometimes you just have to ink them.
Sure. All right, Tiago, let's move on to I'm gonna say your build, but I believe this is also like influenced by somebody else potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working on it with a bunch of people, but this is mostly just like the stock list that like you typically see people playing online into you.
Sure.
But this Kita card can be a bunch of different cards, like it can be Jasmine or 6-cost Ariel or Captain Hook, like, but basically everything else is pretty standard. I think this deck is utilizing the Headless Horseman, which draws both players 3 cards, and then they both discard 3 cards at random, and then deals 2 damage for every spell discarded in total. And then you do get to see how much damage it deals before you choose what you're gonna deal the damage to. So it's just another one of these giant bombs. Like you're really trying to ramp into your Tinkerbell, Hades, Vincenzo, Headless Horseman. And yeah, you have a ton of spells in your deck, right? So it a lot of the times is hitting for quite a bit. But it's just like really utilizing the Cinderella to get you to these big things while also having like a little bit more princesses than some of the other decks. So you get even more benefit from the Cinderella, which just further um, makes the bigger difference like between the games where you find Cinderella and the games where you don't. Like it was already super dependent on it, but now that you're playing even more princesses, which are like not on average the strongest cards on their own, makes it even more important to get Cinderella. But basically, it's like the same game plan, but you have one jump ahead, which gives you a lot more consistency to hit your turn 2 ramp, but then you're also a deck that plays Mulan and Cinderella and Amari, which lets you, and even Goliath, like if you're able to just play the one jump ahead and your hand economy gets destroyed, then the Goliath, like it doesn't really matter with that. So you have a lot of ways to like minimize the downside that one jump ahead has while also like getting the benefit of having the increased consistency and like also having more hits for your Headless Horseman. So just a super solid deck and definitely going to be one of the big players in the meta. I think this might be the most overrated deck. Like everyone's like the blue steel is the greatest thing of all time. Like I don't know. I think the deck's like pretty good and it will be like a good deck, but I think ultimately it like really struggles to deal with a lot of early game decks, and so um, I think you're really, really dependent on getting Cinderella against them. I think you win such a low percentage of the time against the fast decks where you don't get Cinderella on turn 3. So it's definitely has a lot of things that are going to keep it in check, but it's you're doing a lot of powerful things, and I think no deck on average does like more powerful things every single turn than you do. It's just like you're playing one card a turn, so even in the late games, so you are a bit limited in that way.
Is that ultimately why you think strength still finds a place in decks like this? Because, like, strength, if I'm looking at this deck, strength would be one of the cards I would actually consider at least reducing, like maybe putting in 2 visions or something. Because I know, like, when I was playing a similar version of this, we had some like copies of visions to try and find the specific big bombs that I'm looking for. And strength, as you guys mentioned, you're kind of playing, or at least trying to play a big bomb per turn, and you're not going to have so many bodies consistently. But then on the flip side, against the decks that do go a little bit faster and you really need to be trying to remove some of their early game cards, if you don't find the Thunderbolt, then strength is kind of like the next best thing. So do you think, would you agree with that, that that's the biggest reason why it still has to have a place in this deck to try and help out against some of the earlier stuff?
Yeah, I also think like against a lot of decks, it's not always the best on curve, but then like when you're drawing 2 cards off Goliath, like you're drawing 2 cards off Goliath and 1 card a turn, so you always have 3 cards. So like you
Mm-hmm.
can't just ink a card and play a card. So you need some of these cards that you can kind of weave in when you're at like 8, 9, 10 ink. I do think Visions is good in this deck. I would probably just not play Mulan and play Visions instead, but um yeah, I think Strength is like kind of like a late game card in this deck where you're just like trying to pick off their like ready to quester when they're at 18 lore or something,
Mm-hmm.
while also having the flexibility of like combining it with something like Tinkerbell to take out some of the mid game threats.
Sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say the exact same thing. If you look at what we're trying to do in like into a turn 4 Goliath, like if you just think, okay, if we're playing a 7 cost every turn after that, we're how are we gonna get pair down our hand to draw 2 off of Goliath and get like the full value?
Sure.
And one of the ways is you just have eight spells. You draw, you ink, you play one of your guys, and you sing a Zeus or a Strength. And it's also like against the aggro, like Cindy can still sing it, and it's gonna take out something relevant.
Mm-hmm.
So I can take out Inala. Inala can be like a big troublesome card because it quests for so much early, and then Tinkerbell doesn't even do damage to it. So, like if you take out a Tiana and you pay, and then Tinkerbell can't even take it out still. So, yeah, it's just like a double spell thing with Goliath. If you play really hard to the Goliath, like yeah, you can play a 1 cost plus like a tank, but then it has to be exactly tank or like a 1 cost plus a Damari. But yeah, having the spell is much better for getting down to 0.
Speaking about other 4-cost options, because we can see the Kita here, and again, we spoke about Pleakley as kind of like another thing you can maybe do if you don't find it. Would you say that Kita is probably the next best 4-drop to play in kind of the blue steel build? I'm curious to hear your thoughts specifically, Sky, especially since you played the build
Yeah,
that just didn't have another
I really
4-drop.
wanted to play Kita. I was like, okay, well, if it's a very slow meta and there's like a lot of green blue, Cindy into Kita is probably like a good alternative to like Cindy into Cindy. But it just wasn't that great. And like I don't think the meta is going to be so much control that like you can take time to do that. Like on the play, there's plenty of games sure where Cindy into Kita is fine. But going like Kita herself on turn 3 is not like good at all. Like I mean, it's kind of fine if you're going first in some matchups, but there's like definitely better alternatives. I think I'd much rather play like a Pleakley than like the Kita.
Interesting. Cool. Yeah. I think that's pretty much it that we have for the deck lists. We're just over the hour mark. Before we kind of close out, is there anything else that you guys want to talk about that you've like kind of encountered in your testing, or some early meta predictions? Like I know Sky, you kind of said that seems like green blue is going to be pretty good, and I think we're all in agreement definitely that Cindy is kind of it will be like the chase legendary of this set, with maybe Hades as a close second behind it, which is really funny because I just recently did a video of ranking what I would think the top 5 legendaries would be, and it was pretty much that order. I think I might have swapped. I think I had Demona above Goliath, and the more I keep hearing about Goliath, I'm like, Goliath seems to be pretty good. Maybe Goliath's even over Hades potentially. But yeah, just any overall
Goliath
thoughts?
is so weird because going second, like almost every matchup, you can't play him at all. You just have to play like a Tinkerbell into like your 7 cost. But going first, he's just so insane that like it's worth the inclusion. I don't like playing cards that are only good going first, but it's like one of the only times where like I'm okay doing it because it's so good.
Sure.
Yeah, and then he also has the added benefit that like when the game simplifies out on turn 10 or something and nobody has anything, it's like good off the top, even if you're going second, but like on curve, it's only good on the play. I think
for sure.
overall,
He'll draw into an answer, so.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're gonna see a lot of the decks that were good in the last format still be good now. Your purple steels, your amber steels, your blurples, your green blue. But then we're also gonna see the emergence of some of these other blue strategies like blue steel and yeah, blue steel. Just this one. People are also playing like blue red and stuff, which are basically like these mono blue decks with like Maui Shark and Maleficent Dragon. Just instead of some of this top end that like you get from blue steel, like Vincenzo or Tinkerbell or whatever. So that's one of the directions that people are taking. But I also think some of the like green decks are a little bit underexplored, like green steel and the green purple like Brainiac kind of versions. So I think people are gonna ultimately play a lot slower because even like the decks that were fast in the previous meta or like faster, like purple steel, or got some more slow tools. So I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see how things shape out. But I think these blue strategies with Cinderella definitely seem like the strongest way that people are going from the new cards at least.
Have either of you guys tried to test any sort of Amber Sapphire build more? Because I think for general card quality, I think Amber got a lot of interesting tools this set. But I still don't know if it's necessarily there yet, right? It's like, okay, maybe the deck got some more tools, but like, how does a deck like that even begin to try and handle aggro? Or like, basically, the biggest issue that Amber Sapphire has always had is what interaction does this deck have? What disruption does this deck have? And the best pieces are very like niche pieces of removal, where we've got like the Horseman Strikes to deal with evasive cards, or we've always had World's Greatest Criminal Mind, which I mean, against something like this blue steel deck, it'll take out a Goliath. It might take out like it take out some stuff at least. So that's a card that can maybe help, but it's still very, very situational. And then like Hades is kind of like your decent element of removal. So I'm just very curious about that ink combination overall and what that might become. Because if we ever get a few more consistent pieces of removal paired also alongside some good card draw, because that's also something that color pairing struggles with. Like I think some of the best card draw tools we have are it's like 7 cost Surfer Stitch, right? But if we're doing some ramp stuff, then Surfer Stitch seems like it could be a potential interesting option. And there's also 2 cards I want to mention within Amber and Sapphire that I actually think are really good, but they're just not really going to see a lot of play in particular at the moment. And this is also just one of them is the Sapphire Champion, the Daisy Duck. So this like 5 cost inkable 5/6. That quest for 1, but it gives all of your other Sapphire characters resist +1, and then whenever you quest with them, you could look at the top card of your deck and either put it on the top or bottom. I think a card like that, stats wise, is super strong. I think its ability is super strong. But all the decks I've tried to play it in so far personally is all the blue cards you play are just like ramp spells and like basically Tipo, Cindy, and Hades. Like majority of the cards in your deck, character cards in your deck, aren't also Sapphire characters, so you don't really get to take get a huge advantage out of that. Well, then the other card I want to talk about is like I think the Amber Champion's actually pretty good. The like 4 cost inkable 2/5 that gives you other Amber cards +2 willpower. So like I would be very curious to try and see more of a Amber Sapphire mid-range / control deck, but I just think it's still maybe missing some of those pieces. So Thiago, I'd love to hear your thoughts because I'm curious if that's something you've maybe tried to explore so far.
I think it's just like a matter of what you're getting from adding Amber to what you're losing from not having access to a different color. So like if you compare that deck that has a somewhat similar game plan to like this blue steel deck, it's like you're adding Surfer Stitch, but you're losing Goliath, and you're adding like some of these World's Greatest Criminal Mind things, which is a good card against like blue-green, like it takes out Clarabelle and Prince Philip and things like that. But you're losing access to like Vincenzo and Headless Horseman and He Hurled His Thunderbolt and Tinkerbell. So you're just, in my opinion, losing too much from to pair with your broken Sapphire cards like Tipo, Sail, Hades, and Cinderella. That I think it's just ultimately we don't have enough payoff to playing it in that color pair.
Yeah, there's not enough good top end. I think that's one of the things I was looking at when I was trying to make this combination work. I looked at all of the top end within blue and yellow, and it was literally Hades and Surfer Stitch were like the best cards and everything. You had like the Chippendale, which is like fine, but it's like not the type of card you play in this deck. Like you want to be playing a lot of characters, you want to be getting a lot of value. So yeah, that's a good point, and that's probably ultimately why the deck is struggling, because it doesn't have the big bombs. Don't feel as powerful as Tinkerbell, as Goliath, as Vincenzo, as a Horseman potentially. Sky, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, because I know you've mainly engaged with Amber on more of an aggressive side. And I know, Thiago, you also posted like an aggressive Sapphire Amber deck, which we said the biggest problem with that deck was like, yeah, it just doesn't have Strength of Raging Fire, which is like very, very different. But would you be curious?
It's interesting.
Yeah. Go ahead.
There is like a very aggressive angle you can go with this deck, but I don't think it's better than like other aggressive decks. But there's also like obviously mid-range pieces that seem, fairly good, and like you can kind of it feels like the color combination that just is kind of spread thin. Like you don't know where to go, and it's kind of all like below the rest of them right now. Like I think the best way, like the only thing I think that I can see the deck would do better would be like the Shift Daisy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's like actually like not a bad card, because like having your opponent play an ink exerted for the next turn can like completely throw people off of their curve. Most decks don't plan for that, so like they're not going to want to waste a card to do something suboptimal for the next turn, so it might actually just turn them off for a full turn. I think that's actually pretty strong. And then like I think the best thing you can do with it is singing Down in New Orleans for some other like big thing on the board.
Sure.
The only problem with that is that you just don't have a lot of card draw, so like you have to figure out like a way to like draw cards while doing shift sing thing. And also Down in New Orleans is just so like hit or miss that like it's probably not a good sign when that's like the best thing you can do. But I think you could potentially do some sort of like Daisy shift Down in New Orleans with Detective Package. I think Frank's deck was like something very similar to that, because like I mean Judy's a good card, that's like advantage you have. So you do that shift line, you sing Down in New Orleans, hit like a Judy, and then she hits something, like that's not bad. But yeah, that is kind of like fairy tale end, so I don't think it's gonna be a big contender or threat this set. Maybe next set we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, we're probably getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but it's interesting to think about when that so we saw that angel card, right, revealed for set 11, which when you go second, it's like a singer 3 for 1. It's basically a Cindy, except it's a 2/2. That will very much also depend on if the songs alongside it are pretty powerful, but for the most part, like, we have, I feel like we've only ever seen Amber paired very well with the likes of Amber Steel, and also when I played like Amber Emerald, right? Like the discard deck, because it had discard elements, and then you're also playing Ariel, which is just like a very song heavy deck. So um, it's an interesting one because you need some songs to have some super good payoff as well. So like I'd be curious if we ever get a combo deck where like Circle of Life is like super consistent to try and pull off, or like I'm just very curious what Amber needs to kind of take it to the next level. Does it need to have something like Rapunzel where it was just like card draw on Amber, which, you know, was kind of rare, but Rapunzel was like super, super, super strong, and maybe in particular Amber Sapphire needs just more type of disruption, more type of interaction, removal, card draw, stuff like that you said. So I'm
Yeah,
curious.
it's missing
Yeah.
like it's missing all of it. Like if you look at Amber Steel, they have like Doc and they have Strength. Like
Mhm.
if you look at all these theoretical board states that you like try to construct in your head of like, okay, this is what Amber Sapphire wants to do to build like a board state that's pretty strong. If you just think of that and then like think of, okay, well, what if they had like a Strength at this point and they just took off their biggest character? Then it's like we're in an insane spot. And like that trade off, like, yeah, maybe the bodies are a little bit bigger, a little bit harder to deal with, a little bit more value, but honestly, most of the time, like as long as there's like something like a Tiana and there's just bodies on the board, having the Strength is just going to be better than anything you're constructing with like Amber Sapphire.
Yeah, the deck just cannot touch. I just feel like the deck cannot touch Amber Steel at all. Pretty much, I feel like it would just fold to it completely. Honestly.
Yeah, I think Amber, just as a color in general, has like not, they've been carried by like a few very powerful cards for a long time. Like I think if they didn't have Rapunzel, the deck would not be super good. I think Cinderella was like only as oppressive as it was because of Let the Storm Rage On, and so like we saw Let the Storm Rage On be similarly oppressive when Blue Steel could play Bell on turn 1 and then sing it. So I think it was more a problem with Let the Storm Rage On, and then you just had access to like the Ariel Spectacular Singer, Daisy Duck, and Rapunzel, and that kind of like carried the archetype throughout its lifespan. And right now you have like Daisy Duck and Tiana, and it's just like these very narrow cards that have like carry the entire color's power level. So it's like very difficult to like morph the deck into different archetypes and play it with different ink combinations when it's had like so few defining cards, and then the defining cards kind of pigeonhole you. Like if Daisy Duck and Tiana are your two best cards right now, like you're gonna play it in an aggressive
Yeah.
strategy. So I think the color in general is missing a lot of tools to be used in different ways. But I think every every Amber deck, at least in the last couple metas, have been like Daisy Duck decks, right? So like we saw dogs pop up in Fabled, but that's because, you know, it's like a Daisy Duck deck, and obviously the Tramp Seven's like a super strong effect, but um, yeah, I think just the color's like lacking in a bunch of ways.
For sure. Yeah. Well, that's pretty much it for this week's episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. It's always a pleasure chatting with Sky and Thiago. Again, reminder, if you guys want to sign up for the Sharp Gaming event, you can go back to the start of the video and scan the QR code. You can meet Sky there. I'm excited for more events as well. I do want to give a big shout out. We're going to have Lorca Quest happening this weekend in Paris. Not sure on how many players are playing at the moment, but it will be streamed live on the Podcana YouTube channel on Saturday and Sunday. Myself, Kim, and Martin are going to be streaming and casting. Super excited for it. I will say, I believe it's still going to be set 9. However, it seems like, you know, I'm honestly surprised that the meta hasn't changed so much, so it could still be very, very valuable to watch, and we're going to try and fill some time by playing some set 10 decks in between the games as well. So if you guys are, you know, not attending any events this weekend, it would mean a lot if you guys tuned into the stream. But yes, if you guys enjoyed, the number one thing you can do is leave us a review over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, your local podcast platform. There's a video version available over on youtube.com/@PodcanaPodcast. Hit the subscribe while you're there. Twitters are @Kawatech_CG, @ThiagoXS23, and @SkyLorcana. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will catch you in the next one.